right, good afternoon, gentlemen, and a few of you ladies that may be listening. This is the Spiritual Art of War, back at it again with another episode. This time we're going to kind of address some of the comments that were made, or just people feeling some type of way about the black athlete and Becky conversation. And a lot of people are on this whole, people should mind their business. Why should people care? Yada, yada, yada. Throughout history, people always cared. Okay? Because there's always been race and ethnic tension among people. Now, the modern concept of race and ethnicity is somewhat diluted. It is not exactly accurate to how it was prior to what people would consider the Renaissance period up until modern time, because those were new concepts that were brought later, such as black and white. So those really didn't exist as a race. In fact, there's no race of people called black. There's no race of people called white. Those are social constructs that were created really under guise of colonialism or imperialism, okay, by those that were in the European society, what they called themselves to be intellectuals, Karl Linnaeus and Johann Blumenbach. I suggest you look up who those men are. And I think one of the disconnects that's actually happening now in 2025 is the generational. And I think you have a lot of people that are, in that under 30 age that don't understand the way the world was prior to them being born. If you were even coming up during the 90s, interracial dating was very taboo. It's still somewhat taboo now. It's just viewed in some ways as somewhat socially acceptable, but it's never really been acceptable in the eyes of many, because there's a history behind it. And a lot of people, even a lot of so-called white males, they don't even understand. Because they don't even understand what it was like in time past. They really don't. Because if they really sat down and understood how their people operated, they would be like, dang, and maybe they don't feel like it's messed up. Because in a lot of ways, you have people that have this whole, I can do it, but you can't. Okay, so for example, under the books, on the laws, they have something called miscegenation laws. Okay, these are laws that were designed to say no race mixing allowed. However, even among white people, they understood that race mixing was off limits for white women, but acceptable for white men. They just had social parameters by which they could do it. So if you quantum leap yourself to the 1950s, let's say we're in 1955, we jump into DeLorean like Marty McFly, and we go back to 1955. If you were a white male, you can have illicit sex with non-white women without anybody checking you. This was expected. This was viewed as manly. If you understood back then, many white men back in those times would lose their virginity across town to a black woman. Okay? Or to, a Mexican woman, or to a Native American woman, especially if they lived near these reservations. And they would impregnate some of these women, and children would come out of them, and they wouldn't have to claim them. They didn't have child support back then. Neither were white men dragged to court to take care of a kid by a non-white woman. They just weren't. Okay? If they wanted to step in and provide resources, they could, but it was under their own volition. There was no requirement for them to do so. And guess what? It was completely socially acceptable. Okay? So a lot of people don't even understand the context by which this issue of interracial dating / marriage is coming from. And quite frankly, like, black women having to say about pro black athletes and Becky is crazy, considering their history with white men post-slavery. A good chunk of black women knew that they were free in American society to deal with any man. It's the only thing that black women had an issue with was when they dealt with the white man could treat them however he wanted. So if he wanted to beat her silly, he could do that. If he wanted to take her resources, he could do that. He wasn't going to prison for that. He wasn't getting, there was nobody that was going to come to the defense of a black woman that was in an abusive relationship with a white man. Not even her own brothers could do so. Her own father couldn't do so. This is what y'all don't even understand. A lot of you that want to get on a comment board and, speak out of ignorance. I'm going to just assume that you just don't know the history. So I'm not going to really, get on you too hard, because some of you're from an age and time of social media where, a lot of people just react but don't learn. So they don't understand why it's a big deal. It's why in that intro, when somebody had a problem, they're like, oh, go get straight to the point. You should have just started at the 6-minute mark. Well, you have to give a preface. You see, that's why they have, maybe because y'all are from a generation where y'all didn't really read books, but when you got a book from the library, you had like a preface, you had an introduction, and then you had chapter 1. There was a reason why they did that. Okay? So if you go to part 1, that's like my chapter 1 under discussion. That's why I gave you an intro. The intro was to help lead you and set you up into the discussion. That's why I titled it as intro and then part 1. Okay? So if you've ever read a book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you have never read books. You've only watched YouTube videos, okay, off of your tablet that your mama gave you. So you don't even understand the concept of how to, receive information. So you got to get, I could have really gave a deeper history prior to that, but I tried to give a quick summary and to let you know that the black college athlete wasn't on white campuses everywhere. Now, during the time of, you could say, Jim Crow segregation, you had certain states that didn't have it at that level. Like, for example, if you look up certain of these players from back in the day, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly known as Born Lou Alcindor. He went to UCLA. Okay? He went to UCLA during the time when a black high school basketball player, he couldn't go to a lot of southern schools. Okay? In fact, Kentucky, if you go back during that time, if I have to look and see when Kentucky had their first, in fact, let me do that right now. Because we got technology. So I don't have to, I can just go ahead and ask on my other phone. What years did Kareem Abdul-Jabbar play for UCLA? So from 1966 to 1969 is when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly known as Lou Alcindor, played college basketball for the UCLA Bruins. Now, let me do this. What was the first year that the University of Kentucky basketball team had black players? So the first black player that signed with the University of Kentucky was Tom Paine in 1969. Okay. So basically, and you know, the reason why that happened was because of Lou Alcindor, because of the dominance of the UCLA Bruins, which that UCLA team is considered the greatest college basketball team of all time because of Kareem. Okay? And this is one of the reasons why you have some old heads that actually consider Kareem Abdul-Jabbar the greatest basketball player of all time, because he won all those titles when he was those college basketball titles at UCLA, player of the year multiple times, and gets to the NBA and wins 6 titles, you know, himself. MVPs, all that, right? And then he finished his career as the highest scorer of all time in the NBA. So the reason why Kentucky, which was a racist school, out of rough, did not like black players on his team, the alumni, the students hated black players. Okay, they hated when they went up against, when those all white University of Kentucky basketball teams went up against black teams of black players, they would call them racial slurs. The only reason why they started adding black players is because they could no longer compete. That's where Tom Paine came in the last year that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly known as Lou Alcindor, was in his last season with the UCLA Bruins before he joined the NBA. They did it out of necessity because they had to. Do you think that those white parents wanted their daughters to see these talented black men who going to these campuses and their daughters potentially sleeping with them? But because of the civil rights movement, because of the civil rights that were passed under Lyndon B. Johnson, because of the assassination, by large what paid was the assassination of Martin Luther King in April 4th of 1968, it made people look at things differently and be like, maybe we need to change the way we're doing things. And that's what happened even at the school level. All these things had a butterfly effect, man. The death of Martin Luther King had a butterfly effect into the recruitment of black players, with the federal government backing them integrating into these schools. It accelerated because the segregation was already removed, but a lot of these colleges, these universities, they did not want to bring in those. That's why you still had like Governor George Wallace, I believe from Alabama, that was, sending police to stop integration of some of these schools. Okay? In fact, yeah, you can look up Governor George Wallace. Look at some of these videos. See, a lot of you young kids, y'all, some of you are actually, y'all are adults. Like, and I know this because some of you that are like Gen Zs, y'all are like in your 20s, y'all have no idea about this history. You just know about Lil Wayne and LeBron. That's what you grew up on. You don't even know about your generation before, because a lot of your parents, they don't teach history. And if you were raised by a single mother, mothers generally just don't care about history, because history has no value unless it's nostalgic. That's the only time that women really care about history, is if it's a personal nostalgia connection to them. Even black women, when they look at history, they look back and try and look at history of like a black woman that made them feel good about themselves or something. It's like more nostalgia. They don't look at history in its totality. So that's the reason why a lot of times when I go into these discussions, I understand why there's going to be a disconnect, especially with some of you young ones. You get to talk to a man, 40 and up, they know. Especially if you grew up if you grew up in a multiracial area where you went to high school in the 90s, you know that interracial dating was somewhat taboo. You knew that some of the parents didn't like that. And I remember even growing up, there was I was in middle school, and there was a girl. She was actually kind of popular. White girl, grew up in this white neighborhood. This neighborhood. Let me tell you how this neighborhood was. It was like old money, old white money, upper middle class neighborhood outside of Houston, in a town called Richmond. The name of the neighborhood was Pecan Grove, and mind you, I went to a big high school, so we had people that lived in Richmond, Houston, and Sugar Land. I went to a very big high school, so we had a lot of neighborhoods that was going there. And this girl was dating one of my friends, okay, so-called black man or young gentleman. He's actually from Philly. His family had moved to Philly, and he was the second oldest. He had three. He was second oldest of three. He had an older brother, and he was the second oldest, and his parents were educators. They moved down to Houston. They actually lived in that same neighborhood, and they had these like nice apartments like in that particular neighborhood. So that's where they moved to first, like into like a 3-bedroom apartment, and then because they were planning on getting a home in the area soon. So during that time that they lived in those luxury apartments in that neighborhood, mind you, this is like a 90% white neighborhood, 95% at the time probably. And this neighborhood had a bunch of like, you know, old money white folk. This is like in the 90s, bro, like mid 90s. And if you went through the neighborhood, all their streets were named after like former Confederate generals, even like a couple of Klansmen had the names of the streets. This is in the 90s now, okay? They had Old South Drive, Dixie Lane, Robert E. Lee, Robert E. Lee Street. Bro, it was nothing but ode to the Confederacy, bro. Straight Gone with the Wind type stuff. Birth of a Nation type. And this girl's father was part of the Ku Klux Klan. We didn't know it at the time. This is true story. She was kind of popular, middle school. So my friend, he was popular himself. He played basketball. He was super popular. They ended up dating, and they wanted to go to school dance, and I guess the dad found out, and he shut that down. So he came to me and was like, yo, I can't, me and so-and-so, we can't go together. And I said, why? He said, man, because she told me that her dad's in the Ku Klux Klan. And I was like, what? I'm like in the 8th grade. We in the 8th grade, bro. In fact, during this time, the OJ trial was going on. True story. The OJ trial was going on. Because when I was in 8th grade, that's when the verdict came out. So I was like, damn. So this girl, she kind of lost her popularity because of that in a way. At least among the general school. But there was other girls that came in later that became, surpassed her in popularity. But she definitely was hurt by that. Because, we're a very racially mixed school. So that's going to hurt you. Your dad's part of the Ku Klux Klan. And he was trying to talk to this. Yeah, he shut that down. You know what I'm saying? I'll never forget that. So, and mind you, he ended up becoming a D1 basketball player. So just look at that from middle school to high school, graduating high school year 2000. He ends up going to a D1 college for basketball. And this is an issue. So when you guys talking about, oh man, why should people care? People care, bruh. This is real life. So back to the college basketball or the athletes meeting these women on campus. That's why it happened. Because they started to integrate these teams because they could not compete. Listen, man, if these schools could still win NCAA football championships without black players, they would have all white teams. If they could still win college basketball championships They would still have all white teams just like them old Kentucky teams had, because they were recruiting a lot of the best white players. They were winning championships. The schools were not really integrated. There was a lot of different situations going on, and that's what happened. I think I said it before, Pat Riley played on one of those all-white teams. In fact, let me go ahead and ask my Google, what years did Pat Riley play for the University of Kentucky basketball team? Yeah, so Pat Riley played for the University of Kentucky basketball from 1964 to 1967. So he was on them all-white Kentucky teams with racist Adolph Rupp, who did not want to have no black players. And this is how a lot of you that are younger, this needs to be known. You need to know the dynamics of what you're watching when you're watching sports and athletics, and how it impacted the rest of the world that you're in. The reason why, some of the reasons why a so-called black man can actually date openly a white woman is in part because of the impact of the collegiate sports, because of that forced integration that occurred. And they knew, if you get these young black men near our white girls, they're going to sleep with them. Okay? They knew that. And there had to be a certain level of social acceptance. And I can only imagine what it was like in the early 70s on a lot of these campuses, especially like away from the West Coast. You start talking about places like University of Washington, like, those are liberal areas, UC Berkeley, UCLA, USC. That's a whole nother ball game. But the majority of the country is not like those places. You start going into the Midwest, you start going into like the Mid-South, because Kentucky, Tennessee, those are Mid-South. You start going into the Deep South, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. It gets real. But if you look at the history, that's how it happened. That's the reason why you see this happening. So now you come into 2025, you don't realize it was a whole history of what was happening prior. And now, because people want their school to be, win championships and have exciting games, out of necessity, they had to recruit the black athlete. Because there's no, and even they even know it, there's no all-white team that's going to win a national championship in basketball or football. It's not happening, bro. Like, even white dudes will freaking laugh if you told them, do you think that an all-white college football team can win a national title? They would even laugh. Even some of your most racist white boys would be like, no, bro. I'm telling you, they know it. They know it's not happening. Those days are done. Those days are done. If they want to see that, they can go pull up a YouTube video and they can go watch the University of Texas, the 1969 Texas Longhorns win a national championship. The last all-white football team that did so. Bro, I'm going to save certain ones for certain episodes. I'm not going to get too deep because there are certain stories that I can kind of go into. There are certain situations I can go into deeper when it comes to this subject. But I'm going to have to go ahead and shut this down on this episode. So, again, let me know what you think. This is part 2 of black athletes and black pro athletes and Becky. And there's a reason why I'm dealing with the college level on this one, because it goes without saying, if a man is a professional athlete, he's getting what he wants for the most part. Okay, and I can show you examples. In fact, I might have to go into an example separately because it's not a Becky situation, but I can go into a situation that I have you like, huh? Yeah. Because once you're a pro athlete, it's a whole, you're not even, your race, you're what you are doesn't even matter. What you look like don't matter. You are a professional athlete. You touching them M's, you touching them millions. Come on, man. You can look like Shrek. You're going to be pulling baddies out here. You dig? So let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode.